Hey everyone, Dr. Steve here. You know it as well as I do, but most students need a B or better in A&P. But did you know that students are doing that all over the US using my Anatomy and Physiology Digital Suite as a low-cost alternative to expensive textbooks? Digital Suite delivers the key concepts of A&P with short, assignable tutor videos and a bulleted narrative study guide that not only explain the concepts of A&P, they show them happening. Combined with state-of-the-art dissection and physiology lab simulations and a vast question bank for quizzes, homework assignments, and exams, Digital Suite meets students where they are and gives them the tools to master the content. It's the perfect supplement to an OER textbook or just on its own. If you're an A&P instructor, contact your McGraw-Hill representative today and ask about Anatomy and Physiology Digital Suite. If you're a student, tell your instructor about it. There's a link to Digital Suite in the show notes of this episode. Get your B or better in A&P with A&P Digital Suite. Hey everyone, welcome back to my podcast, Anatomy and Physiology Bit by Bit. I'm your host, Dr. Steve Sullivan, coming to you from Bucks County, Pennsylvania, where I've been teaching anatomy and physiology since 2002. Today's episode is continuing the shift into clinical application. Moving forward, I plan to have guests on who specialize or have expertise in the topics that are at hand. There are some things I can handle pretty well on my own, and I'll continue to do that from time to time, but sometimes the topic demands an expert in the field. So instead of a lecture-style episode, it will be a conversation that I have with that expert, asking all the questions that need to be answered. And it's not just questions for someone studying to be a healthcare professional. It's for anyone who wants to know more about what ails us as human beings. Today's episode is a question, an important question, but one that is difficult to answer. What is cancer? It's one of those topics that almost everyone has a personal connection to, myself included. In 2022, my wife was diagnosed with breast cancer. And in 2025, I was diagnosed with prostate cancer. We're both doing well, thankfully, and I'm sure everyone listening has been touched in some way by cancer. While different cancers are different, when combined into all cancers, it is the number 2 leading cause of death in the world. But few of us have had the chance to really unpack what it is from the inside out at the level of the cells, the tissues, and the physiology. Again, cancer isn't a single disease, it's a category. It's a broad family of disorders that all share a common theme. Cells stop obeying the normal rules. The rules that govern when we divide, when to repair, when to specialize, and when to self-destruct. When those safeguards break down, the result can be uncontrolled growth, invasion into nearby tissues, and sometimes spread to distant organs. Now, oncology is not my specialty. As I've mentioned before, I've never been a cellular biology specialist. So to help us make sense of all of this, I'm joined by my first repeat guest, Dr. Christy Kestner, PhD. Dr. Kestner is a neuroscientist whose specialty also includes immunology and oncology, the study of cancers. So we're going to tap into some of that oncology knowledge. Dr. Kestner is the founder of Brain and Beyond, where she translates complex scientific principles into accessible, easy-to-understand videos that promote science literacy and foster public trust in evidence-based research. Brain and Beyond can be found on Instagram, Substack, and YouTube, and I'll post links to all of those in the show notes so you can find her easily. Dr. Kestner is also a science writer at EndoSymbiont, a company that provides life science companies, research institutes, and organizations with a reliable, scientifically informed platform they can use to reach the masses. And this just scratches the surface on the scientific rock star that is Dr. Christy Kestner. Recently, we had a great conversation designed to build your understanding of cancer bit by bit. We discussed the fundamentals like what cancer cells actually are, how they differ from normal cells in growth and repair, and the key terminology that often gets thrown around, words like tumor, mass, benign, malignant, and metastasis. After this episode, when you hear those terms, you'll actually know what they mean. From there, we zoom in on causes and risks, like how DNA damage and mutations accumulate, why cancer is often described as a disease of gene regulation, and how factors like smoking and vaping, infections, environmental exposures, and inherited mutations can shift the odds. We also talk about the body's defenses and why they fail sometimes. Because cancer isn't just biology, it's also decisions, we spend time on the practical side, screening and early detection, what prevention actually looks like in the real world, and the logic behind major treatment approaches like surgery, radiation, chemotherapy, targeted therapies, hormone therapy, and immunotherapy. And we include why treatments are often combined and why side effects happen in the first place. Whether you're a student learning the foundations of A&P, a healthcare professional sharpening your skills and knowledge, or someone who simply wants a clearer, calmer explanation of a complicated topic, this episode is here to give you language, structure, and understanding of cancer. As always, I want to preface this episode by reminding listeners that this show is purely educational and is never intended to be taken as medical advice. And by no means should you allow this show to be a substitute for seeing an appropriate medical professional. If you suspect you are not well, or if you have any of the signs or symptoms you hear about in this episode, you should contact your medical doctor immediately or go to your local emergency room. So take a breath, settle in, and enjoy my conversation with Dr. Christy Kestner. All right, Dr. Christy Kestner, thank you so much for coming back onto the show. I'm so excited to have you back so we can talk about cancer. So tell the listeners, remind them if they didn't hear your first episode, who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, so again, I'm Christy Kestner. I'm a neuroscientist and a science communicator, and my research background focused on neuroimmunology and oncology. And so now I focus on translating science into language really that the general public can understand. That way, it's not siloed in labs or academic institutions, because I feel like it's so important just to get science out there for the public.
I agree. That's the reason I started this podcast in the first place, was to talk about anatomy and physiology on a level that was accessible to people, not just anatomy and physiology students or healthcare practitioners. Well, so you have this oncology background, and this episode is all about what is cancer, just from a general perspective, so people really know what it is. So if you were talking to someone with no medical background and they said to you, "What is cancer?" How would you explain it in plain language?
I think it's just so stereotyped that cancer biology is really complicated. But I feel like once you understand this, it's actually pretty simple once you break it down. So usually I start by explaining cancer with what normal cells do first, because cancer really only makes sense once you understand the rules first. So your body is made of trillions of cells, and basically they all behave as members of a disciplined team, I like to say. And so they only divide when needed, they specialize, they repair damage. And when they're no longer functioning properly, they basically self-destruct just for the greater good of your body. So cancer really happens when these cells stop being a team player. So it really ignores these basic rules of your body. So these cells, they keep growing when they shouldn't. They resist signals to stop. They avoid this normal self-destruct process. And ultimately, over time, these abnormal cells can crowd out your healthy cells. They can invade surrounding tissue, and then sometimes they can travel to distant organs. So I want people to understand that cancer isn't something foreign that just suddenly appears in your body. It's basically our own cells that behave in a way that they weren't ever meant to.
Okay, that's a really good explanation. Taking it down to like the nitty gritty of what the cells do. And sometimes in my class, we talk about mutations because we talk about mitosis and how DNA replicates and things like that, and how sometimes this happens. So what happens in a cell to stop it from following the normal rules it's supposed to follow, and instead of behaving like a regular stomach cell, it behaves like a cancer cell?
Right. So again, it makes sense when you understand what these normal rules are for healthy cells. So, the healthy cells follow these strict biological rules. And so again, they divide when they are needed. They specialize into their specific roles. They communicate with their neighboring cells, and they also repair DNA damage. And so, if this damage is too severe, they normally self destruct in a form called apoptosis. So, cancer is really what happens when all these systems fail. So, another point is if the damage is too severe, then again, these cells do self destruct through this process called apoptosis, which I like to tell people it's more of like a built in safety switch. And so these cells really sacrifice themselves so the whole organism stays safe. So basically, your whole body is highly and tightly regulated. And cancer is really what occurs when this regulatory process breaks down.
Okay, so apoptosis is kind of like a self-destruct button. When
Yep,
things are going wrong, let's just self-destruct and let the other cells take over.
correct.
Right. So, and sometimes that switch doesn't get flipped. Yeah,
Exactly.
that's interesting. We talk about apoptosis in my class. We call it programmed cell death. That's like one of the other
Mhm.
terms that listeners may have heard for apoptosis. Sometimes you'll hear terms, I mean all the time, you'll hear terms like tumor, mass, benign, malignant. Those are common terms that people hear when you talk about cancer, whether it's something that you're dealing with or if you're watching a medical TV show or something like that. What are those terms, tumor, mass, benign, malignant? What do those actually mean to people when it comes to cancer?
Yeah, I feel like these are words that really get thrown around a lot. And I think some people do confuse them and kind of mix them up. So they're not interchangeable. And basically, at like the simplest definition, a mass is really just a lump and it does not mean cancer. And then moving on, looking at a tumor. So this is basically just an abnormal growth of cells. And from here, tumors can either be two things. They can either be benign or malignant. And benign tumors, so these normally grow locally and they don't invade nearby tissue or spread to distant parts of your body. But sometimes they can still cause problems depending on their size or where they're located, but they don't metastasize. And then lastly, your malignant tumors. So this is what people think of when they hear the word cancer. So these are what invades your surrounding tissue and they have the potential to spread to other organs. And so this ability really to invade and spread is what makes them dangerous. But I feel like everybody needs to understand that not every tumor is cancer. And so I feel like the difference between these types is whether these cells are behaving aggressively and breaking the normal tissue boundaries.
Okay, well, that's good. And I guess the term neoplasia comes in there as well, or neoplasm. Is that, which one would that relate to?
I mean, it really depends on what stage, but normally neoplasm, scientists think about that kind of as an early form of a malignant tumor.
Okay. And I guess if we broke it down, neo meaning new and plasia meaning cells or tissues, right?
Mm.
These new cells or tissues forming. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I know this is a very general, and cancer is 1,000 plus different diseases, but in general, what causes cancer? How should people understand the roles of genetics, aging, environment, infections, lifestyle factors, things like that? I know that the loaded question, what causes cancer, right?
Yeah.
Tons of things. But in general, why are our cells stopping following the rules?
Yeah, I feel like this is one of the biggest points that I want the general public to understand is, as you said, cancer is not caused by one single thing. So usually it develops when there's mutations that accumulate over time. And then obviously you have risk factors as well. So you have aging that is going to increase your risk just because there's more time for this DNA damage to occur. Secondly, genetics do play a role, and this can play a risk in some cases, but keep in mind that most cancers are not purely inherited. So there's other factors like environmental exposures. You can think of infections, inflammation, and as well as lifestyle factors. So these all play a role in a person's risk. And again, just to drive this point home, that cancer isn't directly a cause and effect issue.
Right. I remember when I took my cell pathology classes back in the 90s, we used to talk about like usually in the gene, more than one thing had to happen,
All right.
right? It wasn't enough to have the genetic marker. Then there also had to be some kind of other stimulus that flipped a switch kind of
Right.
thing. And so that brings me to like the lifestyle stuff like cigarette smoking, right? I mean, obviously, I tell my students all the time that's the
But,
number one thing
yeah.
you
Or
got to stop
vaping.
doing.
Or vaping. Vaping
Or
is
vaping, right? Right.
bad.
So
Yeah.
vaping, smoking, we evolved to breathe air. So, so putting things in there that are
Yes.
not that can't be good.
Right.
And then the other thing is interesting is infections because we don't typically think of infections as being able to cause uh, cancer, but we know now that like HPV. Okay, quick little side note here since I mentioned HPV and then didn't really say what it is. HPV stands for human papillomavirus. It is one of the most common and most easily spread sexually transmitted viruses. It passes primarily through intimate skin to skin contact during sexual activity, including vaginal, anal, and oral sex. And because it's so contagious, the vast majority of sexually active people will encounter it at some point. In fact, it's estimated that 80% of people contract HPV during their lifetime. For most individuals, HPV is a quiet, temporary infection. The immune system recognizes the virus and clears it on its own. And this is often without the person ever even realizing they were affected. When symptoms do appear, they depend on the specific HPV type involved. Some strains cause genital warts, which are small, flesh colored bumps that may be smooth or raised, sometimes forming clusters with a cauliflower like appearance in the genital or anal region. Other HPV types are responsible for common warts, the rough bumps that show up on your hands or feet, though those are typically caused by strains different from the ones that are spread sexually. The greatest clinical concern comes from high risk HPV strains, which can persist and quietly alter cells over time. These early cellular changes usually produce no symptoms and are most often detected through screening tests such as pap tests and HPV testing. If high risk HPV infection remains untreated and continues for years, those abnormal cells can progress to cancerous cells. Depending on the site of infection, HPV is linked to cancers of the cervix, anus, and the oropharynx, or the throat. When cancer does develop, warning signs may include unusual vaginal bleeding, pelvic pain, or pain during intercourse, symptoms that should always prompt medical evaluation. The outlook for HPV infection is generally reassuring. Most cases resolve within about 2 years as the immune system clears the virus. The risk rises when infection becomes persistent because longer lasting infection increases the chance of developing precancerous changes and, in some cases, actual cancer. That's why prevention and screening work hand in hand. Vaccination is especially important because it can prevent the majority of HPV related cancers, more than 90% of those caused by HPV, by protecting against the highest risk strains before exposure occurs. Although there's no cure that eliminates HPV directly, clinicians can effectively treat the problems the virus causes. Genital warts can be removed with procedures such as freezing, surgical removal, or prescription topical medications that stimulate a local immune response. If screening detects precancerous stages, those abnormal cells can often be removed before cancer ever even develops. In that way, even without a cure for the virus itself, timely prevention, screening, and treatment can dramatically reduce HPV's long-term impact. But the most important thing you can do is get vaccinated. The brand name for the HPV vaccination is Gardasil. I believe it's still 2 shots over the course of maybe 6 months. Both of my sons have had it. This is the way to go to prevent HPV from infecting and making people very sick. Okay, back to our conversation. This virus causes cancer, right?
Right.
How does that work?
That's one thing that's really interesting because I remember when that actually got FDA approved when I was in high school. And I remember getting that as a teenager, but you probably remember like years ago, they were only giving that to women. And then once more research came out, they realized, that men also basically were just as risk at spreading this. So I'm glad more awareness with this got out. But yeah, definitely important. Just like fun fact, you probably have been reading about this too, how Australia is going to be the first country that's on track to completely eliminate cervical cancer by 2030, just
That's
because of their increase of vaccination, which is
that's
really cool.
unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
That's unbelievable because here in the US, there's so much pushback
Oh.
against vaccines of any kind. And
Mm.
I'm really, really nervous. I do have an infectious disease specialist coming on in a few weeks who we're going to talk about vaccines and vaccine hesitancy,
Yeah.
kind of thing. And that's a real problem. I'm 54 years old. There was no HPV vaccine when I was in high school and things like
Right.
that. So I think this is really important, knowing that, a virus that's enormously contagious and so widespread can cause things like cervical cancer.
Nobody does selling better than Shopify. Shopify is the home of the #1 checkout on the planet. And the not-so-secret, with Shop Pay that boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts go abandoned and way more sales going through. So if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. On the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout that Skims uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period for 3 months at shopify.com/Westwood1, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/Westwood1 to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/Westwood1.
The sun's shining, birds are singing, and all feels right in the world.
Until the season changes and suddenly you lose your motivation to get out of bed. In fact, 1 in 5 people experience some form of depression, no matter the season or time of year.
At the American Psychiatric Association Foundation, our vision is to build a mentally healthy nation for all, because we want you to live your best life and be your best you all year round.
Please visit mentallyhealthynation.org to learn more.
Why is cancer not just one disease?
I feel like this is one of the biggest myths I see on the internet, especially with the general public. So people, as we said, they need to understand that cancer, we really use this one word just to describe hundreds of biologically different diseases. So it's interesting because it can start in any tissue, and each type behaves differently, really depending on the cell that it originates from and the mutations that drive it. So, you can have lung cancer, leukemia, and a brain tumor are some examples. So they're all very biologically different diseases, even though they're all termed cancer. And so I feel like that's what really makes modern oncology treatment interesting, is how it's really focused more on the specific biology of the tumor instead of just treating cancer holistically as one condition.
Yeah, it's Interesting because we tend to see the most common ones, right? So things like lung cancer, cervical cancer, breast cancer, colorectal is one that we're getting a lot of press on with mostly because of celebrities, it seems.
Yeah.
Um, and what is it about those tissues? What is it about certain cells that makes them more susceptible to cancer?
Yeah, so really where the cancer originates really matters a lot and makes a difference because every tissue has a different structure and function and a surrounding environment. So some organs have more of a tight physical space, kind of think of like the brain, or even, a small tumor can really have significant symptoms just from pressure. So other tissues have a richer blood supply or lymphatic networks. So this really allows the cancer and makes it easier for these cells to spread. But the normal job of this tissue also influences the symptoms. So you can think of, a tumor in the pancreas may stay silent and quiet for a really long time because there's room for it to grow really before causing obvious symptoms. And then you can think of cancers that affect, hormone producing organs. Now, their symptoms will probably start earlier because this disrupts immediate signaling. So, really, if you just think of it, that your anatomy really shapes how cancer grows and how soon it's noticed, which then it shows how risky it becomes.
Okay. And that makes me think of how important it is to do preventative
Yes.
checkups to make sure that even when you feel well, that you
Yes.
should still be looking in because the
Exactly.
absence of symptoms does not equal health.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So you had posted on your Instagram account um, your the fact that you're going to get a colonoscopy,
Hmm.
and I think that's a big one because the age for recommendations has been coming down
Right.
over the years. It used to be at 50 you should get a colonoscopy. Now they're saying 45 for some people.
Yep.
So how important is it to do these regular checks like a colonoscopy for men to get your PSA checked for your prostate or for women to do normal breast exams and mammograms and things like that? I mean, that's the key here, right? Because catching something early saves lives.
It really does. So, in the case of my own experience and just having multiple colonoscopies at an early age, I mean, mine first one was when I was 27. And, I was aware enough of the symptoms of my body. I didn't know if this was normal or abnormal. So, I have a good relationship with my GI doctor. And just to be safe, even though I wasn't old enough, just to rule out any risks, he suggested, hey, let's go ahead and get you a colonoscopy just to rule anything out. And since it turns out I do have IBS, I do have a little bit more of a risk factor for that. And I do have a family history. So that's why we knew to take this seriously because, case in point, as you said, if I waited until I was 50, which at the time was the norm, I mean, I could have had cancerous polyps. You just don't know. And by prevention, I mean, just the success rate of beating this is so much higher. Like case in point for colon cancer, people that do preventative measures and, identify something. I mean, their 5-year survival rate is over 90%, which is huge.
Right.
So
Yeah.
just pay attention to your body and your body more than anybody else.
Right. That's important. Early detection seems to be our best defense
Yep.
at this point, other than stop smoking and things like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, of course. So you mentioned spread a couple times. You used the M word, metastasis. This is the thing that people fear the most when it comes to cancer. What does
Yep.
metastasis actually mean when someone says the cancer is metastatic?
Yeah, so I feel like the simplest way to explain this is metastasis is really when these cancer cells leave their original location and they establish and create new tumors somewhere else in the body. So, in order for this to happen, basically, these cancer cells have to go through several steps. So, they first need to break away from their neighboring cells, and they also need to invade the surrounding tissue. They also need to enter the bloodstream or the lymphatic system. And basically, they have to survive traveling through the body and ultimately exit into a new tissue and successfully grow in a completely different environment. So it's really inefficient if you think about it, but it's really multifactorial and complex. And this is really why not every cancer spreads, but when this process does happen, it does make the disease a lot more dangerous because multiple organs are often involved.
Right. It seems it would be harder to treat as well because the treatment now is broad
Yep,
rather than really
targeted.
isolated to a certain area.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's interesting because I mean, that's the scary part. I guess that's when the staging comes in, right? Stage 3, stage 4, things like that,
Right.
when something gets to another organ. So we mentioned signs and symptoms a couple of times. What should people be on the lookout for when it comes to their own bodies and the potential for cancer?
First, as we were kind of discussing, that a lot of cancers really grow quietly and silently at first, just because your body is really good at compensating. And so, again, these early tumors, they're probably small, they're slow growing, and they're really located in areas where there's space for them to expand, which really won't immediately affect function or cause pain. And really, once symptoms appear, it's because these tumors interfere with the normal tissue. So they could also press on your nerves or organs, cause bleeding, and alter this metabolism. And so, this is really when you get these symptoms that start demonstrating warning signs. And this is when you know that you need immediate and prompt medical attention. So some of these symptoms you can think of are unexplained weight loss, just a persistent fatigue and tiredness, usually new or unusual pain that doesn't really resolve on its own. You can also have changes in bowel, bladder habits, unusual bleeding, or a new lump or a mass. So again, these don't immediately mean cancer, but these immediate and persistent changes really do deserve medical attention.
Right, that's important to keep an eye, like you said, know your body. You
Yep.
know your body. So when things seem to be changing or off, that's a really good thing to keep on top of. So how does that determine the treatment, the different kinds of treatments that we hear about, targeted therapy, immunotherapy, chemotherapy, radiation, surgery?
So
What,
really, treatment, it's not just randomly chosen, it's really matched to the biology and the mechanism of the tumor. So, if a cancer is localized, then surgery might be the best option. If it's sensitive to radiation, then this will be used to either shrink or eliminate these cells. And chemotherapy is more often than not really used on those cancers where there's rapid cell division occurring. So, targeted therapies are really designed to block these specific mutations or signaling pathways that drive cancer's growth. And then you have other therapies like immunotherapy. So, this really works by helping your own immune system recognize and attack these cancerous cells. And then in some cases, people use hormonal therapy, and this can be used when the tumor really depends on hormones for its own growth. So I feel like modern cancer, modern cancer treatment is really about understanding what is driving these tumors. And then based off of that, that's where you're choosing your therapy that's interrupting this biological process.
okay. And that's probably where like the pathology report comes in, where the pathologists take a look at the cells, maybe kind of determine what kind of cancer cells, how aggressive are they, things like that.
Yep.
Yeah, that's interesting. So a lot of these treatments, the downside of them is that they're not only affecting the cancer cells, like
Yeah.
they're also hitting the healthy cells. And that's why a lot of times, I guess, people who are doing radiation therapy or chemotherapy, they feel like they're actually sicker from the treatment than
Yeah.
that. Why would that happen?
So, really in more advanced or complex cases, your physician really has to weigh the benefit versus the side effects. And so their overall goal is really to improve survival and your quality of life. And I feel like this is one of the trickiest realities of oncology that your doctor has to navigate. And most of these cancer treatments do target processes that these cancer cells use. As I said, like this rapid cell division or these specific signaling pathways. But unfortunately, healthy cells in your body, they sometimes use these same processes. And so this is where you get your side effects. And so the overall goal is kind of a balance, right? You want to maximize this harm to the cancer while minimizing harm to the person who's receiving the treatment. So, yes, there are cases where there are situations where the treatment may cause more harm than benefit. But that's why these treatment decisions are very individualized, person to person. And also, your physician, they have to consider the stage of the cancer, the biology of the tumor, the person's overall health, and then obviously like the overall goals and the person's quality of life.
So,
So
so much goes into it.
really, I mean, you kind of think of it as puzzle pieces, right? It's not just attacking the cancer aggressively. You have to think of what's really most appropriate.
I remember, again, when I was in school, and it was a really long time ago, they talked about chemotherapy, and one of the main chemotherapies that they use went after cells that were dividing, right? Makes
Mhm.
sense, right? These are cancer
Mhm.
cells. But your healthy cells divide too,
Yep.
especially epithelial cells. And so, like these so many symptoms and side effects, and it really stinks. But the results are getting so much better as
Mhm.
time goes on. So we talked about screening tests like colonoscopies, mammograms, and things like that. How does that differ from like a diagnostic test for cancer?
Yeah, so we know obviously prevention and early detection really does save lives, as what we were kind of previously talking about with colon cancer. But this really isn't the same thing. And I feel like most people kind of confuse these two. So prevention really is minimizing risk before cancer develops. So with prevention, you can think of vaccines, avoiding smoking, avoiding vaping, minimizing certain environmental exposures, and just supporting your overall metabolic health by exercising, getting, a good night's sleep, and eating a healthy diet. Now, these screening tests, they look for cancer really before these symptoms appear in people who do normally feel well and feel healthy. So this is, like you said, in the case of mammograms or colonoscopies. So here, the overall goal is really early detection. And once you have this early detection, then your treatment is going to be more effective. So
Okay.
then you have diagnostic test. And so this is used really when there's already something that's on the radar and something that's, a little more of a concern. So this is where you have your symptoms that are showing up, maybe abnormal lab findings or a suspicious screening result. And so here, basically, the overall goal is just to either confirm or rule out this cancer. So I feel like understanding the distinction between these two things, this really helps clinicians communicate this clearly and avoid, just confusion and fear to the patients.
Okay. So a screening would be a colonoscopy, a mammogram, a PSA test, and then a diagnostic test would be like a biopsy,
Right.
right? Where the pathologist actually looks at the cells and says, "Yes, I can see
Yep.
these kinds of cells." Okay. I think that makes a lot of sense for people. So most of my listeners are students who want to be healthcare practitioners. maybe even their patients, maybe even their caregivers, what are the most important things, real quick, that you can say to understand what cancer is?
Okay, so I would say there's probably three big takeaways. So, number one is that we know that cancer is really complex, but now we really understand more about biology today than we have in the past. And because of this, which is so interesting, is that treatments are becoming more precise and personalized, patient to patient. I would say, second, cancer isn't this direct cause and effect type story. Again, we know it's multifaceted where genetics, the environment, aging, your immune biology, just all of these do play a role in this. And then I think the third, which is the most important, and a lot of people really don't bring this up, is that really the human side is just as important as the science and the treatment. I feel like a lot of physicians forget that patients are people. And so, they're navigating fear and uncertainty and confusion. And so I feel like really the best healthcare providers. So they're the ones that are really combining this scientific and medical rigor while also being empathetic and clearly communicating goals to their patients.
Okay, that's great. Those are good things for takeaways for these future healthcare practitioners.
Yep.
One thing that popped into my head a couple of times, you mentioned the environment. We talked about modifiable risk factors like smoking and and vaping, but when it comes to environment, a lot of things that we're hearing, I think we might have talked about this the first time you were on, is environmental hazards like toxins, PFAS, or forever chemicals that we're hearing a lot about.
Yes.
And then there's all these articles now that, you know, you can't sue Monsanto now for the chemicals that are in pesticides. So what about avoiding these kinds of things? Is this something that's obviously recommended?
Yeah, I feel like environmental issues that I normally think of is, like pollution or even being outside too long and not wearing
Right.
sunscreen because
Ultraviolet, right.
this is all preventable. But I feel like with plastics, the problem is there's just not enough long-term evidence that's really showing the ramifications of this. I feel like a lot of it is more correlational.
Okay.
But I feel like we just don't know much about this yet. I was reading a paper recently and kind of the same thing. I feel like a lot of people have really associated fertilizers with Parkinson's disease. And you probably saw this circulating around a lot last summer, how there was all these claims on social media, how people who live closer to golf courses have, I can't remember, like 10 times the risk of Parkinson's disease. And, most people, they're going to believe this. It's fear mongering. They're believing the
Mhm.
headlines, but like really diving into the literature, same thing. I mean, there's just so many other factors. A lot of it's really correlational.
Okay, what Dr. Kestner is referring to is an article published in the Journal of the American Medical Association in May of 2025, in which the authors found that there was a 126% higher incidence of Parkinson's disease in people who lived within 1 mile of a golf course. The article speculates about pesticides being used getting into the water system, but no evidence has been presented to show that as a cause. The point here is that this is one study, and the correlation doesn't necessarily mean the golf course is causing Parkinson's. What it does mean is that people should be taking a deeper look into the reason.
I did read there's like some new type of bacteria in these fertilizers called chlorpyrifos that is showing more of a correlation with like dementia and Parkinson's, but I feel like all of these, it's just too early to say. We need more long-term data to really have a definite answer.
Okay, good. So we don't want to confuse correlation and causation. We've talked about that before on the
Yes.
show, for sure.
Nobody does selling better than Shopify. Shopify is the home of the #1 checkout on the planet. And the not so secret, with Shop Pay that boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts go abandoned and way more sales going through. So if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. On the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout that Skims uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period for 3 months at shopify.com/Westwood1, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/Westwood1 to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/Westwood1.
The sun's shining, birds are singing, and all feels right in the world.
Until the season changes and suddenly you lose your motivation to get out of bed. In fact, 1 in 5 people experience some form of depression, no matter the season or time of year.
At the American Psychiatric Association Foundation, our vision is to build a mentally healthy nation for all, because we want you to live your best life and be your best you all year round.
Please visit mentallyhealthynation.org to learn more.
All right. Well, finally, thank you so much. You are so generous with your time. I really appreciate you coming back on and explaining all this to people and sharing your expertise. So, last thing, how can people find you? Are you working on anything new right now? Where can they find you on social media? Because I know you share a ton of really, really good stuff. So let people know how they can find you.
Yeah, so thanks for having me back. It's always really fun having these conversations with you, and they're so important for the public just to understand. For people to find me, you can find me Brain and Beyond. So I'm on Instagram, TikTok, Threads, and Substack, and I recently started a YouTube channel. So there I'm Brain and Beyond Science. And then, I share usually more professional updates on LinkedIn, even though I did just create my Brand Beyond business page yesterday on LinkedIn, so you can find me there. But yeah, really, I'm just focusing on just growing my science communication platform, as you said, where I really just translate neuroscience and health research just in evidence-based content just for the public, where it's accessible, it's fun, and it's easy to understand. Recently, I started working as a scientific expert with a couple of new digital health platforms, and I'm starting some consulting work with a biotech company on some neurocognitive studies, and continuing my work as a scientific writer for Endosymbiont. So definitely busy, but I like
You
having,
got a lot going on, and
I love it. It's fun.
and it's great, and it's so beneficial to the general public. So for any of the listeners out there who want to learn more about scientific literacy and all of the amazing biological and neurological information that Dr. Kestner is putting out, I will put links to everything in the show notes so that you can very easily find them. Once again, Christy, thank you so much for coming back on. It was really a pleasure. I learned a ton.
Thanks for having me.
I am so glad Dr. Kestner was able to join me again for this episode. She really took a broad, complex topic and made it so easy to understand. There's so much more to learn about cancer, and in future episodes, we will definitely cover more specific topics. Now, in the intro, I mentioned that I have been dealing with cancer myself, and that isn't widely known as of yet, but I can't stress the importance of regular screenings because I have no signs or symptoms of prostate cancer. I found out from a routine blood test at a regular checkup with my doctor. The test is called a PSA test, which stands for prostate-specific antigen. When the prostate cells are very active, as you find with cancer, the number elevates. I followed up that finding with an MRI, which found a mass on my prostate, and then I had a biopsy. The biopsy takes cells from a bunch of different locations on the prostate, including the mass, and then a pathologist examines them to see if they're malignant, which they were. So in the end of January 2026, I had surgery to remove the prostate and seminal vesicles at Fox Chase Cancer Center in Philadelphia. Now we monitor the PSA periodically to see if it starts going up again. I am on the younger end of the age range for prostate cancer, but my father also had it, which increases the risk. So far, so good. I am 99% recovered from the surgery at the time of recording this, which is about 6 weeks after, and the prognosis is very good. It's a manageable type of cancer. Anyway, I want to thank my amazing guest, Dr. Christy Kestner, PhD, for shedding so much light on the fundamentals of cancer. Once again, you can find her on all social media platforms at Brain and Beyond, and I'll be sure to post links to all of them in the show notes. I can't stress enough how valuable her content is to healthcare providers, students, and the general public. So make sure you check her out sooner rather than later. There is so much to learn from Dr. Kestner. Thanks again for listening. If you have any questions, be sure to email me at minus55media@gmail.com. I hope this podcast is helping you get your B or better in A&P. Good luck, and I'll talk to you next time. Anatomy and Physiology Bit by Bit is a production of Minus 55 Media and is hosted by the Believe Network. Please take the time to rate my show and leave a review. You can also check out the content I post on Instagram and YouTube as @StudentHelp4AP. That's the number 4, AP. Special thanks to my family, Bucks County Community College, and McGraw-Hill Education, where your instructor can find Anatomy and Physiology Digital Suite, my low-cost tutor video-based digital learning solution for anatomy and physiology currently being used at several colleges and universities. If your instructor isn't using Digital Suite, let them know about it. The link is in the show notes.
The sun's shining, birds are singing, and all feels right in the world.
Until the season changes and suddenly you lose your motivation to get out of bed. In fact, 1 in 5 people experience some form of depression, no matter the season or time of year.
At the American Psychiatric Association Foundation, our vision is to build a mentally healthy nation for all, because we want you to live your best life and be your best you all year round.
Please visit mentallyhealthynation.org to learn more.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.